Shalom, and welcome to the Fellowship of Christian Goths Shabbat Parasha services. And tonight we are doing our second reading in Exodus, and it is called Ve'era, or I appeared. The Torah portion is Exodus chapter 6, verse 2 through chapter 9, verse 35. The Haftorah portion is Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 25 through chapter 29, verse 21. Our Brit Hadasha, or New Testament portion, is Basora, or Gospel reading, is Matthew chapter 12, verses 1 through 14. Then Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 9, verses 14 through 24. And Paul's second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 6, verse 14 through chapter 7, verse 1. As always, we start with the candlelight prayer, which this week will be done by Amber.
Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with your commandments and commands us to be a light to the world. Let light shine in the darkness.
In our prayer before reading, blessed are you, Yahuwah, our Elohim, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with your commandments, and who has given us your Torah, your instruction, your living word, your path to salvation, Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus Christ. May our eyes be open to taking in your word. May our hearts be open to having your word inscribed and your law, your Torah, inscribed on our hearts. And may our necks not be stiff. May our hearts be circumcised. May we see that you are our Elohim, that you are the mighty one above all else, that you are El Shaddai, you are God Almighty. And may our mouth be open to proclaiming your word, and our hands open to living out your word, as shown to us through your Son, Yeshua HaMashiach. Amen. The first reading, the Torah reading, Exodus chapter 6, verse 2 through chapter 9, verse 35. Elohim spoke to Moshe and said to him, I am Yahuwah. I appeared to Abraham, to Yitzhak, and to Jacob as Elohim Almighty, as El Shaddai. But by my name, Yahuwah, I did not make myself known to them. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, the land in which they lived as sojourners. That'd be as foreigners dwelling in the land. Moreover, I have heard the groaning of the people of Israel, whom the Egyptians hold as slaves, and I have remembered my covenant. Now see, look right there. That shows you that the covenant always existed. It did not just happen at Mount Sinai, because if he's remembering the covenant, hey, they haven't gotten to Mount Sinai yet. He made a covenant with Abraham. He made a covenant with Isaac. He made a covenant with Jacob. He made a covenant with Abel and with Seth. And so it's the same covenant. It's just it gets renewed. It's a renewed covenant. Say therefore to the people of Israel, I am Yahuwah, and I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. I will deliver you from slavery to them, and I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great acts of judgment. I will take you to be my people, and I will be your Elohim. And you shall know that I am Yahuwah, your Elohim, who has brought you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. And of course, the Hebrew word for Egyptians is Mizraim, which also has connotations of burdensome. So, I will bring you into the land that I swore to give to Abraham, to Yitzhak, and to Jacob. I will give it to you for a possession. I am Yahuwah. Moshe spoke thus to the people of Israel, but they did not listen to Moshe because of their broken spirit and harsh slavery. You know, how many times do we experience that in life where God is speaking to us and we are blinded to what he is saying? We've stopped up our ears because we're so miserable and so heartbroken that we're ignoring the the loving kindness of our Creator. And that also happens with the people in our lives. How many times are we in so much misery that we're not listening to the loving kindness and the comforting advice and words of our friends and family? So definitely something we can relate. So Yahuwah said to Moshe, go in, tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the people of Israel go out of his land. But Moshe said to Yahuwah, behold, the people of Israel have not listened to me. How then shall Pharaoh listen to me? For I am of uncircumcised lips. That is, that I stutter, my mouth is malformed. I don't communicate very properly. But also it means I'm not a well-educated speech. I'm not very eloquent, very eloquent in my speech. But Yahuwah spoke to Moshe and Aaron and gave them a charge about the people of Israel and about Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to bring the people of Israel out of the land of Egypt. So it's God saying, no, you will do what I say, man. And I love that moment there where he's like, the people of Israel, the people who claim to be your people, won't listen to me. So how in the world am I going to get Pharaoh to listen to me? These are the heads of their fathers' houses, the sons of Reuben, the firstborn of Israel, Hanok, Palu, Hazron, and Carmi. These are the clans of Reuben. The sons of Simeon, or Shimon, Yermiel, Yamin, Ochad, Yachim, Zohar, Shuel, the son of a Canaanite woman. These are the clans of Simeon. These are the names of the sons of Levi, according to their generation. Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. The years of the life of Levi being 137 years. The sons of Gershon, Libni and Shimei, by their clans. The sons of Kohath, Amram, Ashar, Hebron, and Uziel. The years of the life of Kohath being 133 years. The sons of Merari, Mahali, Mali, and Mushi. These are the clans of the Levites according to their generation. Amram took as his wife Jochebed, his father's sister, and she bore him Aaron and Moshe. The years of the life of Amram being 137 years. Now this shows you that earlier in the Bible there were more daughters being born than what were being mentioned, because we know Jochebed had Miriam as well, and yet it did not list her right now. Also in the previous reading, it talked about Jochebed, but did not give her name. And it talked about Moshe's father, but didn't give his name. But here's how we have their name. We have the names here that Amram, or Amram, is the father of Moses, and his mother is Jochebed. The sons of Ishar, Korah, Nepheg, and Zechariah. The sons of Uziel, Mishael, Elzaphan, and Sithri. Aaron took as his wife Elisheba, the daughter of Aminadab, and the sister of Nashon, and she bore him Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar. The sons of Korah, Asir, Elkanah, and Abiasaph. These are the clans of the Korahites. By the way, all these names become much more important several weeks in the future from now, and several months in the future from now. All these people and these family and these children, they're there throughout the entire rest of the Torah cycle. So it is important that's going through these names. Eleazar, Aaron's son, took as his wife one of the daughters of Putiel, and she bore him Phinehas. It's another person that's mentioned later. These are the heads of the fathers' houses of the Levites by their clans. These are the Aaron and Moshe to whom Yahuwah said, "Bring out the people of Israel from the land of Egypt by their hosts." Or that means by their multitude. It was they who spoke to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, about bringing out the people of Israel from Egypt, this Moshe and this Aaron. On the day when Yahuwah spoke to Moshe in the land of Egypt, Yahuwah said to Moshe, "I am Yahuwah. Tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, all that I say to you." But Moshe said to Yahuwah, "Behold, I am of uncircumcised lips. How will Pharaoh listen to me?" So he's continuing from last week where he keeps on saying, but God, no, you picked the wrong guy. I can't do it. I stutter. No, I can't do it. And God said, "You'll do it. I'll give you the ability." And Yahuwah said to Moses, "See, I have made you like Elohim to Pharaoh, and your brother Aaron shall be your prophet. You shall speak all that I command you, and your brother Aaron shall tell Pharaoh to let the people of Israel go out of his land. But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and though I multiply my signs and wonders in the land of Egypt, Pharaoh will not listen to you. Then I will lay my hand on Egypt and bring my hosts, my people, the children of Israel, out of the land of Egypt by great acts of judgment. The Egyptians shall know that I am Yahuwah when I stretch out my hand against Egypt and bring out the people of Israel from among them." Moshe and Aaron did so. They did just as Yahuwah commanded them. Now Moshe was 80 years old and Aaron 83 years old when they spoke to Pharaoh. Then Yahuwah said to Moshe and Aaron, "When Pharaoh says to you, 'Prove yourselves by working a miracle,' then you shall say to Aaron, 'Take your staff and cast it down before Pharaoh, that it may become a serpent, or a seraph, or a dragon, or a snake.'" Those are all the same word in Hebrew. So Moshe and Aaron went to Pharaoh and did just as Yahuwah commanded. Aaron cast down his staff before Pharaoh and his servant, and it became a serpent. Then Pharaoh summoned the wise men and the sorcerers, and they, the magicians of Egypt, also did the same by their secret arts. For each man cast down his staff, and they became serpents. But Aaron's staff swallowed up their staff. Still, Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them, as Yahuwah had said. So something to note here is that a staff was a symbol of power. So that means Aaron is showing the power of Yahuwah Elohim. However, the priests of the Egyptian false deities, which as we covered in Genesis, are the watchers. They are the fallen angels, or demons, as you may now know them to be. The fact that the priests of probably like Amun or Ra were able to throw on their staffs and they were able to turn to snakes, that shows that, yes, of course, demons and angels, they have more powers than us man. But then the fact that Aaron's staff, which represents the power of Yahuwah Elohim, devoured their staffs, means that their power is as nothing to the power of Yahuwah. That the power of Yahuwah is all consuming and lays waste to all other power, which is another way of saying that he is the Elohim, he is the mighty one, and he is the El Shaddai, he is the God Almighty above all others. There's none more mighty than him, and all other might is as nothing compared to his might, because all might comes from him. It's also, interesting to note that he mentioned that, he shall bring the plagues down to Egypt as a judgment on them. So that means any plagues, any ills in our life, that they are some form of a judgment, either usually on something that we ourselves have done, although it could be a judgment against others if it's them causing the ills. It could be a judgment against their hearts as well, because people, of course, can persecute the righteous as well. So that is a judgment against them at that point. But, the judgments against Pharaoh and against Egypt are due to Pharaoh's sins and the sins of Egypt. Then Yahuwah said to Moshe, Pharaoh's heart is hardened. He refuses to let the people go. Go to Pharaoh in the morning as he is going out to the water. Stand on the bank of the Nile to meet him, and take in your hand the staff that turned into a serpent. And you shall say to him, Yahuwah, the Elohim of the Hebrews, sent me to you, saying, let my people go, that they may serve me in the wilderness. But so far you have not obeyed. Thus says Yahuwah, by this you shall know that I am Yahuwah. Behold, with the staff that is in my hand, I will strike the water that is in the Nile, and it shall turn into blood. The fish in the Nile shall die, and the Nile will stink, and the Egyptians will grow weary of drinking water from the Nile. And Yahuwah said to Moshe, say to Aaron, take your staff and stretch out your hand over the waters of Egypt, over their rivers, their canals, and their ponds, and all their pools of water, so that they may become blood. And there shall be blood throughout all the land of Egypt, even in vessels of wood and in vessels of stone. So they're going to have a drought, basically. There's going to be no drinkable water. Moshe and Aaron did as Yahuwah commanded. In the sight of Pharaoh and in the sight of his servants, he lifted up the staff and struck the water in the Nile, and all the water in the Nile turned into blood, and the fish in the Nile died. So that's their primary source of, of food there too. And the Nile stank, so that the Egyptians could not drink water from the Nile. There was blood throughout all the land of Egypt. But the magicians of Egypt did the same by their secret arts. So Pharaoh's heart remained hardened, and he would not listen to them. As Yahuwah had said, Pharaoh turned and went into his house, and he did not take even this to heart. And all the Egyptians dug along the Nile for water to drink, for they could not drink the water of the Nile. 7 full days passed after Yahuwah had struck the Nile. Pharaoh's seeing what his priests are doing and hardening his heart. That also reflects how sometimes God is showing us miracles. He's showing us signs. He's showing us wonders. But then we look at, all the achievements of man, and we don't realize that those achievements are only there because God has given man so much blessings. And we think, oh, see, those aren't really signs from God. God's not really trying to speak to me. And we ignore God and we harden our hearts to God, and we shouldn't, because God is trying to speak to us in his signs and in his wonders. Then Yahuwah said to Moshe, go into Pharaoh and say to him, thus says Yahuwah, let my people go, that they may serve me. But if you refuse to let them go, behold, I will plague all your country with frogs. The Nile shall swarm with frogs that shall come up into your house, and into your bedroom, and on your bed, and into the houses of your servants and your people, and into your ovens and your kneading bowls. The frogs shall come up on you, and on your people, and on all your servants. And Yahuwah said to Moshe, say to Aaron, stretch out your hand with your staff over the rivers, over the canals, and over the pools, and make the frogs come up on the land of Egypt. So Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt. But the magicians did the same by their secret arts, and made frogs come up on the land of Egypt. So, if you listen to this, those frogs are getting everywhere. Can you imagine the frogs not only in your yard, but in your bed and in the beds of everyone else in your house, and into your ovens and your kneading bowls? That's where you make your bread. So you can't make bread without frogs jumping into it. You can't bake bread without frogs jumping into your oven. Yeah, so, the frogs are just everywhere. That would just be so painful and annoying, and as this calls it, a plague. Because you couldn't eat your bread without eating frog. But as you heard, Pharaoh's magicians, or his priests of false gods, they also caused frogs to build. See, we can do it too. Then Pharaoh called Moshe and Aaron and said, plead with Yahuwah to take away the frogs from me and from my people, and I will let the people go to sacrifice to Yahuwah. So even though his priests were able to make frogs come up, his priests weren't able to make frogs leave. You notice in each of these, so let's start with the water one, right? So the priests were able to also make water turn into blood, but were they able to restore the water back to normal? Then how were they helping Pharaoh and the Egyptians? Did they help Pharaoh and the Egyptians with this famine of water? They didn't help. And likewise, they were able to make these frogs come up. But were they able to make the frogs go away? No, they weren't able to help. So relying on pagan gods and pagan wisdom, even though it might be able to show some of the wonders that God can show, but God's the only one who can heal you, who can make you better. Those pagan gods, that pagan wisdom, that foreign, that false wisdom, that wisdom that's opposite of the wisdom of God, it cannot heal you. It cannot repair you. It cannot take your pain away. Only God can do that. Only Yahuwah Elohim can do that. And so even though Pharaoh's magicians were able to cause the same wonders, since they weren't able to make it go away, it says, then Pharaoh called Moshe and Aaron and said, plead with Yahuwah, beg God to take away the frogs from me and from my people. I will let the people go to sacrifice to Yahuwah. So he's looking to Yahuwah to help out, to help resolve these, because he knows that none of the Egyptian gods can actually help the situation. Only Yahuwah can. Moshe said to Pharaoh, be pleased to command me when I am to plead for you and for your servants and for your people, that the frogs be cut off from you and your houses and be left only in the Nile, And he said, tomorrow, Moshe said, be it as you say, so that you may know that there is no one like Yahuwah, our Elohim. The frog shall go away from you, and your houses, and your servants, and your people. They shall be left only in the Nile. So Moshe and Aaron went out from Pharaoh, and Moshe cried to Yahuwah about the frog, as he had agreed with Pharaoh. And Yahuwah did according to what the word of Moshe. The frogs died out in the houses and the courtyards and the fields, and they gathered them together in heaps, and the land stank. But when Pharaoh saw that there was a respite, he hardened his heart and would not listen to them, as Yahuwah had said. So, oftentimes in our lives, we will be not obeying God and not following his path through salvation, his Torah, his instruction, his teaching, and then we'll suffer from all of these plagues that we've brought on ourselves. And we will turn to false wisdom to try and heal these things, and it won't help. And when we turn to God and we beg for help, and God helps us, he removes the stuff. But once we see that they're removed, sadly, stupidly, foolishly, instead of following God, instead we then often go, oh, see, problem's gone, and we turn back to disobeying God and not following God's instruction and not following his ways. That so often happens in life. Then Yahuwah said to Moshe, say to Aaron, stretch out your staff and strike the dust of the earth, so that it may become gnats in all the land of Egypt. And they did so. Aaron stretched out his hand with his staff and struck the dust of the earth, and there were gnats on man and beast. All the dust of the earth became gnats in all the land of Egypt. The magicians tried by their secret arts to produce gnats, but they could not. So there were gnats on man and beast. Then the magicians said to Pharaoh, this is the finger of Elohim. But Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he would not listen to them, as Yahuwah had said. So now, even Pharaoh's magicians, even his pagan priests, are not able to do the miraculous signs that Yahuwah Elohim is doing. And even the magicians are going, this is clearly the finger or the work of Elohim. Finger is no way of saying the handiwork. This is clearly the handiwork of the true mighty. So even his pagan priests are saying this. And yet, Pharaoh's hardening his heart and not even listening to his pagan priests. So sometimes, even whenever, it becomes clear that this false wisdom isn't helping us, sometimes we're still too hard-hearted and stiff-necked to listen to God, sadly. Then Yahuwah said to Moshe, rise up early in the morning and present yourself to Pharaoh as he goes out to the water, and say to him, thus says Yahuwah, let my people go, that they may serve me. Or else if you will not let my people go, behold, I will send swarms of flies on you, and your servants and your people, and into your houses. And the houses of the Egyptians shall be filled with swarming flies, and also the ground on which they stand. But on that day I will set apart the land of Geshon, or Goshen. Geshen or Goshen, that's the name for where the Israelites live. So that means that this plague of flies, it's only going to attack the Egyptians and only going to attack where the Egyptians live. But in the land of Goshen or Geshen, the land where the Israelites live, there shall be no flies. So the plagues are not only attacking those who follow the false mighty ones, the false Elohims, the false gods. Those who follow Yahuwah are now being spared of these plagues. On that day I will set apart the land of Goshen, where my people dwell, so that no swarms of flies shall be there, that you may know that I am Yahuwah in the midst of the earth. Thus I will put a division between my people and your people. Tomorrow this sign shall happen. And Yahuwah did so. There came great swarms of flies into the house of Pharaoh, and into, so if you remember from previous weeks, Pharaoh does not mean the king of Egypt. That's why they also say king of Egypt in some lines. Pharaoh means the royal household. So when it says there came great swarms of flies into the house of Pharaoh, that means into the house of the royal family, and into his servants' houses. Throughout all the land of Egypt, the land was ruined by the swarms of flies. It's also worth noting that it said, I will set apart the land of Goshen. I will put a division between my people and your people. Well, the word set apart, or the word division, it's also in Hebrew, it's also the word holy or sanctify. So he's saying that he shall, sanctify his people, that his people are a holy people. They're set apart people. So the people who follow God are holy people, are set apart people. Then Pharaoh called Moshe and Aaron and said, go, sacrifice to your Elohim within the land. But Moshe said, it would not be right to do so, for the offerings we shall sacrifice to Yahuwah our Elohim are an abomination to the Egyptians. If we sacrifice offerings abominable to the Egyptians before their eyes, will they not stone us? We must go 3 days' journey into the wilderness and sacrifice to Yahuwah our Elohim, as he tells us. So Pharaoh said, I will let you go to sacrifice to Yahuwah your Elohim in the wilderness. Only you must not go very far away. Plead for me. Then Moshe said, behold, I'm going out from you, and I will plead with Yahuwah that the swarms of flies may depart from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people tomorrow. Only let not Pharaoh cheat again by not letting the people go to sacrifice to Yahuwah. So Moshe went out from Pharaoh and prayed to Yahuwah. And Yahuwah did as Moshe asked, and removed the swarms of flies from Pharaoh, from his servants, and from his people. Not one remained. But Pharaoh hardened his heart this time also, and did not let the people go. So, again, Pharaoh is asking, please beg Yahuwah to remove these hardships. And Yahuwah, our Elohim, he's being merciful, and he's removing them from Pharaoh and from Pharaoh's land, and yet Pharaoh is still hardening his heart and still not following what God has instructed him. What has God instructed Pharaoh? Let my people go and worship me and make sacrifices for me out at the holy places that I've told them to. That is instruction that God is giving to Pharaoh. And Pharaoh is going, I'll follow you, God. I promise you, I will follow you. Just please take away my burdens. And Yahuwah is being merciful and taking away the burdens. And Pharaoh's going, nope, I'm not going to listen to you, God. I'm not going to keep my word. I'm not going to do what you said. And so because he's doing that, more hardships are going to come to Pharaoh because he's not following Yahuwah. Then Yahuwah said to Moshe, go into Pharaoh and say to him, thus says Yahuwah, the Elohim of the Hebrews, let my people go, that they may serve me. For if you refuse to let them go and still hold them, behold, the hand of Yahuwah will fall with a very severe plague upon your livestock that are in the field, the horses, the donkeys, the camels, the herds, and the flocks. But Yahuwah will make a distinction between the livestock of Israel and the livestock of Egypt, so that nothing of all that belongs to the people of Israel shall die. And Yahuwah said at times, saying, tomorrow Yahuwah will do this thing in the land. And the next day Yahuwah did this thing. All the livestock of the Egyptians died. but not one of the livestock of the people of Israel died. And Pharaoh sent, and behold, not one of the livestock of Israel was dead. But the heart of Pharaoh was hardened, and he did not let the people go. And Yahuwah said to Moshe and Aaron, take handfuls of soot from the kiln, that means from the ovens, and let Moshe throw them in the air in the sight of Pharaoh. They shall become fine dust over all the land of Egypt, and become boils breaking out in sores on man and beast throughout all the land of Egypt. So they took soot from the kiln and stood before Pharaoh, and Moshe threw it in the air, and it became boils breaking out in sores on man and beast. And the magicians could not stand before Moshe because of the boils, for the boils came upon the magicians and upon all the Egyptians. But Yahuwah hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he did not listen to them, as Yahuwah had spoken to Moshe. So even the pagan priests, their love of their false gods and their following their false gods is not saving them from the hardships that's being caused by them not following Yahuwah, the true Elohim. Then Yahuwah said to Moshe, rise up early in the morning and present yourself before Pharaoh and say to him, thus says Yahuwah, the Elohim of the Hebrews, let my people go, that they may serve me. For this time I will send all my plagues on you yourself and on your servants and your people, so that you may know that there is none like me in all the earth. For by now I could have put out my hand and struck you and your people with pestilence, and you would have been cut off from the earth. Cut off in Hebrew is also the same phrase as killed or dead. You shall die. But and in this sense, he's saying that Yahuwah is saying, I could have killed all the Egyptians. I could have cut off your entire kingdom and all your people from the earth. But for this purpose, I have raised you up to show you my power, so that my name may be proclaimed in all the earth. You are still exalting yourself against my people and will not let them go. As we occurred before, the word exalting or exalt or exaltation means lifting up or making a mighty one. So you've made yourself mighty ones over my people and will not let them go. Behold, about this time tomorrow, I will cause very heavy hail to fall, such as never has been in Egypt from the day it was founded until now. Now therefore get your livestock and all that you have in the field into safe shelter. For every man and beast that is in the field and is not brought home will die when the hail falls on them. Then whoever feared the word of Yahuwah, or whoever respected, or whoever honored the word of Yahuwah among the servants of Pharaoh, hurried his slaves and his livestock into the houses. But whoever did not pay attention to the word of Yahuwah left his slaves and his livestock in the field. Then Yahuwah said to Moshe, stretch out your hand toward heaven, so that there may be hail in all the land of Egypt, on man and beast and every plant of the field in the land of Egypt. Then Moshe stretched out his staff toward heaven, and Yahuwah sent thunder and hail, and fire ran down to the earth. And Yahuwah rained hail upon the land of Egypt. There was hail and fire flashing continuously in the midst of the hail, very heavy hail, such as had never been in all the land of Egypt since it became a nation. The hail struck down everything that was in the field in all the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And the hail struck down every plant in the field and broke every tree of the field. Only in the land of Goshen, where the people of Israel were, was there no hail. So another thing to note is I said a few weeks ago that you're starting to notice that Yahuwah often manifests himself through signs of volcanic activity and volcanoes. Not always, but it's a common thing that he does. And then if we go back and we look at these plagues, we see that a lot of these are also happen whenever volcanoes erupt. For instance, oftentimes whenever volcanoes are erupting or about to erupt, red algae grows in the sea and makes the water turn blood red and makes it nasty and poisonous and kills all the fish. And then because of that, because the water is becoming poisonous, the frogs come out from the rivers and lakes and streams and go onto the land. And then gnats and flies and stuff come and attack. And then whenever a volcano erupts, it causes the weather to change and it causes great hailstorms. And of course, it causes fire and brimstone also to fall. So you get fire and ice and hail falling from the sky. And then due to the volcanic gases, you get a volcanic winter where you get darkness. And that will be coming up in a moment. So worth mentioning that these signs are also things that happen with volcanic activity, and that Yahuwah throughout the Bible often manifests through volcanic activity. Then Pharaoh sent and called Moshe and Aaron and said to them, "This time I have sinned." So if you notice, now Pharaoh has called Moshe and Aaron and said, "This time I have sinned." Pharaoh is admitting that he is not following Yahuwah. Because as we've covered before, sin is lawlessness. That is what it says in the letters of James and John in the New Testament. And the Hebrew word for law is Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible. The first 5 books of the Bible. So sin is not following the Bible. God in his Torah, his law, his instruction, because Torah means law, instruction, and teaching. So if the Torah is God's instructions, teaching, and to follow God is to follow his instruction. To not follow God's instruction is lawlessness or lawlessness, which we know is sin. So Pharaoh is admitting right here, look, I know that I've not followed what God has instructed me to do. This time I've sinned. Yahuwah is in the right, and I and my people are in the wrong. Plead with Yahuwah, for there has been enough of Elohim's thunder and hail. I will let you go, and you shall stay no longer. Moshe said to him, as soon as I have gone out of the city, I will stretch out my hand to Yahuwah. The thunder will cease, and there will be no more hail, so that you may know that the earth is Yahuwah's. But as for you and your servants, I know that you do not yet fear or honor or respect Yahuwah, Elohim. The flax and the barley were struck down, for the barley was in the ear, and the flax was in bud. But the wheat and the emmer is a type of wheat, a special wheat that Egyptian high class like the pharaoh would have eaten. But the wheat and the emmer were not struck down, for they are late in coming up. So Moshe went out of the city from Pharaoh and stretched out his hands to Yahuwah, and the thunder and the hail ceased, and the rain no longer poured upon the earth. But when Pharaoh saw that the rain and the hail and the thunder had ceased. He sinned yet again and hardened his heart, he and his servants. So the heart of Pharaoh was hardened, and he did not let the people of Israel go, just as Yahuwah had spoken through Moshe. So, see, sometimes in our life, we even admit to God, look, I realize I've sinned. I'm sorry. And then yet, whenever Yahuwah has mercy on us and removes our burdens, what do? We keep on sinning. And thusly, more plagues, more hardships will come. And right here, it has also told us what time of year it is, and also what holy day, what holy feast the Israelites are trying to keep. Because as we've covered before, these feasts, they were not just given at Sinai. We know this because they've actually been carrying out these feasts throughout all of Genesis thus far, in the previous book that we read. And it referred to them and their times. And so it has just now told us that the barley is starting to come in. It's starting to come out, but hasn't come out yet. And the wheat is nowhere near coming out yet. So that tells us that it is almost time for the barley harvest. Now, what is the barley harvest? That is Passover. That's Pesach, which is one of the pilgrimage feasts where the people must go out and go to the mountain of Yahuwah. So that's why they can't do this here. They can't do these sacrifices in Egypt, because they're commanded, as we know later at Mount Sinai, they're commanded to go to the mountain of Yahuwah for these sacrifices. And they've been doing these feasts the whole time, as we know from Genesis. And yet, these feasts back then, when they were doing them because God told them to do them, but the people didn't know why. They were foreshadowing something. So right now, the people are asking to be let go in order to do Pesach, to do Passover. And what Passover eventually signifies for them is it commemorates their being delivered from Pharaoh and Egypt. So they're being called to do this before the thing that commemorates. And as we later know, Pesach also is foreshadowing, and the deliverance out of Egypt and out of Pharaoh was foreshadowing our deliverance from bondage, from Mizraim, from Egypt, our deliverance from bondage, from sin, from the sin of false teachings, from sins of falling away from God and following false teachings. It's our deliverance from that through the sacrificial lamb and the blood of the lamb of Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus Christ. And so that's the beauty of this. And the same foreshadowing happens for all the feasts. We've talked about that before, and we'll talk about it in the future as well. However, we've actually reached the end of the Torah portion of the first reading. And so now we will be going into the second reading, the Haftorah reading, which is Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 25 through chapter 29, verse 21. Thus says the Lord Elohim, or Yahuwah Elohim, when I gather the house of Israel from the peoples among whom they are scattered, and manifest my holiness in them in the sight of the nations, then they shall dwell in their own land that I gave to my servant Jacob, and they shall dwell securely in it, and they shall build houses and plant vineyards. They shall dwell securely when I execute judgment upon all their neighbors who have treated them with contempt. Then they will know that I am Yahuwah, their Elohim. So, if you remember, the Haftorah portion is much more later. And so at this point, Israel has already been a nation. And so he's talking about how the people have, due to their sin and their falling away from God, have been scattered out to the Babylonians and the Assyrians. But God is saying that he shall gather together his people and return them to his holy land and his holy city. And that his people shall be set apart. That's what the word holy means, remember? So they shall be set apart and they shall be different from our nations. And he shall gather them and he shall lead them, back to the promised land. Now, we know from history that the southern kingdom was able to return, and they were able to return from the Assyrians and the Babylonians, and were able to reestablish the temple on the Holy Mount in Jerusalem. However, we also know that the northern kingdom, the 10 lost tribes, that they continued to be scattered out. And so this is both talking about the southern kingdom coming back and rebuilding the second temple, but this is also talking about in the future, and that's our future too, where the 10 lost tribes have been scattered across all the world, that they eventually shall come to see their set apartness, their peculiarness, their strangeness, from their estrangement from the other people, their set apartness, their holiness, and that they shall turn back to Yahuwah, and that they shall follow Yahuwah, and that Yahuwah shall gather them back into the land for the new heaven and the new earth, for the new Jerusalem, which shall be reigned over by the Messiah. And being as we're Goths, we believe and understand that we are descendants of the tribe of Goth, which is one of the 10 lost tribes that was scattered into Europe. And so, that is telling us about us, that if we remain separate from the mainstream sinning people of this world, we remain devoted to God, holy and set apart, that we shall be a peculiar people and a strange people who are judged by the other nations, judged by other people, judged by our people who are not following God, and we shall be persecuted by them. But if we remain in following God and remain peculiar and estranged from the mainstream world and remain followers of Yahuwah Elohim and his way, that then we shall see the new Jerusalem, and we shall enter in through the gate that has the word Goth in Hebrew written on, which that is told in the book of Daniel and also in the book of Revelations, as we already read, because we already read that section of Revelation a few weeks ago. So this message is important to us, but also to all the other people who are either of the 10 lost tribes or else of the non-lost tribes who need to recognize Yeshua as HaMashiach. There's also a message to all those who are of the nations, that they still have a chance to turn away from their false teachings and their false gods, and to follow the teachings of Yahuwah Elohim, and then they shall be grafted in and become children of Israel. They shall become B'nai Mitzvah. They shall become children of the covenant. They shall become B'nai Israel, children of Israel. In the 10th year, in the 10th month, on the 12th day of the month. We're actually in the 10th month right now. Right now is the 29th day of the 10th month. So we're reading this pretty close to exactly when it's happening, because it's the 10th day, or no, the 12th day. Yeah, it's the 12th day of the 10th month. And here, whereas right now on the day we're reading this, it's the 29th day of the 10th month. So it's happening this month. Now remember, we're not talking about the earlier Torah reading, because the Torah reading was happening in the 12th month. And we know that because of what time it said, because it was right before the barley harvest. And the barley harvest is in the first month, which is Aviv. And so that was in the 12th month. Whereas this, in the Haftorah portion, that is in the 10th month. So in the 10th year, in the 10th month, on the 12th day of the month, the word of Yahuwah came to me, the me there being Ezekiel, the prophet, whose writing this is. Son of man, set your face against Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and prophesy against him and against all Egypt. Speak and say, thus says Yahuwah Elohim, behold, I am against you, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, the great dragon that lies in the midst of his streams. So again, dragon, serpent, seraph, snake. The great dragon that lies in the midst of his streams, that says, my Nile is my own. I made it for myself. I will put hooks in your jaws and make the fish of your streams stick to your scales. And I will draw you up out of the midst of your streams with all the fish of your streams that stick to your scales. And I will cast you out into the wilderness, you and all the fish of your streams. You shall fall on the open field and not be brought together or gathered. To the beasts of the earth and to the birds of the heavens I give you as food. So Apep, or Apep, depending on how you want to pronounce it, was the Egyptian snake god. And he represented the rivers of the Nile, which in Egyptian mythology, all of the earth came from the Nile. And so this snake god, Apep, he is, one of the chief gods of Egypt. And the Babylonian equivalent would be Tiamat. And Tiamat is the same thing, but for Babylon. It is the earth serpent, the world serpent, the chaos serpent of the sea. And then in Norse mythology, it's Jaeger or something like that. Jaeger something. And this serpent appears in almost all mythologies of the world. And in Canaanite mythology, this serpent is called Leviathan or Lothon. Well, in Canaanite mythology, it's called Lothon. In the biblical mythology, in the mythology of what we're reading, in the Israelite mythology, it's called Leviathan. And in all of these mythologies in all the world, either God or the Son of God takes this sea serpent, this chaos serpent, this world serpent, and destroys it and cuts it into little bits and has it devoured by beasts. So in Egyptian mythology, it would have been either Horus or Osiris who did that, who would have been son of Ra. And then in Canaanite or Babylonian mythology, it would have been, what's his name? So the Marmaduke, I think it was Marmaduke. And then Marmaduke, in some Babylonian and Canaanite mythology, it's Marmaduke who does this. And then in others, it is his son Baal who does this. So that is and then in Norse mythology, it is either Odin who does it, or else Odin's son Thor who does it. And then in Greek mythology, this serpent is called Python. That's where we get the English word Python. And it is either Zeus or Zeus's son Heracles who does it. And if a person has ever read, the works of Heracles, the wonders of Heracles, the deeds of Heracles, the python is one of the creatures that Heracles defeats. And you might be wondering, I thought it was called Hercules. No, Hercules is the Roman name for the son of Zeus. It's Heracles in Greek mythology. So that's why I'm saying Heracles, because I'm talking Greek mythology. So Hercules would be the son of Jupiter versus Heracles, the son of Zeus. So that's just a little bit of, sharing with you the different mythologies of the world and how they reflect in scriptures. And of course, you might be wondering here, all right, why do all of these mythologies in all the world have this theme? Well, as we know, pagan wisdom is a corruption of the wisdom of God, because all wisdom comes from God. But the devil, Satan, the accuser, takes the wisdom of God, and the devil and his demons, they corrupt it so that we will exalt them as opposed to exalting Yahuwah Elohim. So what does all this mythology reflect in the true wisdom of God? And this is the reason why I brought up all this mythology. What reflects to us is the serpent, the Leviathan, as we know, represents Satan, Satan. And it is Yahuwah and his son, Yeshua, Jesus, who shall utterly defeat the devil. So that is the truth behind all these mythologies. So in what we just now read, Yahuwah is saying, you think that your mighty ones are mighty? You think that your sea serpent, that your eel that you worship, that your Nile eel that you worship, has power over the earth? So you believe that the devil, because the Egyptians, they're worshiping this serpent as well as also Horus and Ra and Osiris, And God's saying, you believe that following these false gods will give you power. You believe that these gods are the mighty ones? I am the mighty one. It is I who shall defeat the devil. I and my son Yeshua, who shall defeat the serpent. Then all the inhabitants of Egypt shall know that I am Yahuwah. Because you have been a staff of reed to the house of Israel. When they grasped you with the hand, you broke and tore all their shoulders. And when they leaned on you, you broke and made all their loins to shake. Therefore, thus says Yahuwah Elohim, behold, I will bring a sword upon you, and will cut off from you man and beast, and the land of Egypt shall be a desolation and a waste. Then they will know that I am Yahuwah. Because you said, the Nile is mine, and I made it. Therefore, behold, I am against you and against your streams. I will make the land of Egypt an utter waste and desolation, from Migdol to Syene, as far as the border of Cush. Cush is Ethiopia today. No foot of man shall pass through it, and no foot of beast shall pass through it. It shall be uninhabited 40 years, and I will make the land of Egypt a desolation in the midst of desolation, in the midst of desolated countries. And her city shall be a desolation 40 years among cities that are laid waste. I will scatter the Egyptians among the nations and disperse them through the country. You know, if you think about it, ancient Egypt, of course, no longer exists. No one, actively speaks the ancient Egyptian language anymore. No one actively worships the ancient Egyptian gods anymore. And, modern day people, we're not even 100% sure of what the genetic makeup of the ancient Egyptians were. Now, there's arguments. Were they more like the Greeks? Were they more like the Middle Easterns? Were they more like the black people of Ethiopia? What were they like? We question that. That shows that their kingdom at one point was utterly destroyed and their people scattered, because the modern day Egyptians don't speak the language of the ancient Egyptians. They don't worship the gods of the ancient Egyptians, and they might not even be genetically related to the ancient Egyptians. So this shows that the Bible is telling the truth here, that this did end up happening. For thus says Yahuwah Elohim, at the end of 40 years, I will gather the Egyptians from the peoples among whom they were scattered. I will restore the fortunes of Egypt and bring them back to the land of Pathros, the land of their origin. And there they shall be lowly kings. Instead of high kings, they shall be impoverished. They shall be the most lowly of the kingdoms, and never again exalt, or never again exalt itself or high above the nations. I will make them so small that they will never again rule over the nations. And, back then, ancient Egypt was, the king of all nations. It was, big. It had all the power. But ever since the fall of Egypt, have they ever had huge power over the nations and been a world power anymore? No. So again, this shows that the Bible is telling us the truth. And I will make them so small that they will never again rule over the nations. And it shall never again be the reliance of the house of Israel, recalling their iniquity or their lawlessness, when they turn to them for aid. Then they will know that I am Yahuwah Elohim. So never again shall the children of Israel, never again shall the Israelites have to turn to Egypt for aid in time of famine, like how they did back in the story of Genesis. In the 27th year, in the first month, on the first day of the month. So that would be on the New Year's, of the biblical New Year's, which is the first of Aviv, which is around March or April in our Gregorian calendar these days. So on the first month, on the first day of the month, what's funny is, for those listening to the audio recording, today is actually January 1st. So today on the Gregorian calendar is the first day of the first month. And we're just now reading in the 27th year, in the first month, on the first day of the month. And it's also, the Bible mentioned earlier in the same passage, the 10th month, which in the Hebrew calendar, it's currently the 10th month. The crazy coincidences, isn't it? On the first day of the first month, the word of the Lord, or the word of Yahuwah, came to me. Son of man, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, made his army labor hard against Tyre. Every head was made bald, and every shoulder was rubbed bare. Yet neither he nor his army got anything from Tyre to pay for the labor that he had performed against her. Therefore, thus says Yahuwah Elohim, behold, I will give the land of Egypt to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and he shall carry off its wealth, and despoil it, and plunder it, and it shall be the wages for his army. I have given him the land of Egypt as his payment for which he labored, because they worked for me, declared Yahuwah Elohim. On that day, I will cause a horn to spring up for the house of Israel, and I will open your lips among them. Then they will know that I am Yahuwah. So Yahuwah is having Babylon conquer Egypt. And we know from history that Babylon did, that the Babylonians did conquer the Egyptians. The Egyptians were never again a great power. And then Yahuwah says he shall raise up a horn for the people of Israel. The horn, oftentimes in ancient cultures all around the world, represents power and strength. So he shall give power and strength to the people. The horn also reminds us of the call of Yahuwah and the call of the Messiah, of Yeshua, to come and be gathered to God and to follow and worship God. So God shall call the people together to worship him. And so this is talking about in here how the southern kingdom shall be restored and how they shall have their power again and their kingship again, and how they shall again worship Yahuwah on his holy mount of Zion. So that was our second reading for today. And so now we go into the Brit, or the new witness. And we shall start as always in the Basora, or the gospel. Basora is the Hebrew word for gospel. Today's reading is Matthew chapter 12, verses 1 through 14. At that time, Yeshua went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry, and they began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. But when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath." He said to them, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry, and those who were with him? How he entered the house of Elohim and ate the bread of the presence, or the showbread, which it was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priests? Or have you not read in the law, or in the Torah?" So, the Pharisees, they're claiming to be these men well taught in the Torah, who know the Torah in and out. And yet Yeshua is saying to them, have you not read the Torah? These days, of course, Torah is usually interchangeable with the Bible. So the Pharisees are these men who claim that they know the Bible in and out. And yet Yeshua, Jesus, is saying, have you never read the Bible? Or have you not read the Torah, how on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are guiltless? I tell you, something greater than the temple is here. He's talking about, of course, himself, Yeshua, the Son of God. And if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. He's actually quoting Isaiah and also the Psalms. Both Isaiah and the Psalms say that God desires mercy. And that if you don't have mercy, if you don't have love for God and love for your fellow man, then your sacrifices to God at that point are worthless, because they're sacrifices from someone who isn't really following it. You would not have condemned the guiltless, for the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. And the reason why Yeshua was also saying, have you not read the Torah, is because the Torah says that you can gather just enough to eat on the Sabbath, just as long as you don't gather up and store extras beyond what you need that day, because then you're working more than you have to at that point, and you're not resting, and therefore you're breaking the Sabbath. But you can, if you're hungry, you can go through a field and glean from the field and go from hand straight to mouth. That's allowed. So they were trying to tell him, you're breaking the law, you're breaking Torah. And he's like, no, I'm not. So that's why, have you not read it? And then he pointed out that David, when he was hungry, he even ate the showbread. And David was the king over the kingdom of Israel. Whereas Yeshua, he is the King of Kings. He can, all the grain of the earth is his, because all the grain of the earth is God. And the priests, they work on the Sabbath. Like for instance, let's take for instance me. I as one of the shepherds of this congregation, I do a lot of work. I'm always pretty much out of breath after all these readings that we do. And first go, but I thought you're supposed to rest on the Sabbath. Well, if you're doing spiritual work on the Sabbath, I mean, you have to work on the Sabbath. That's your job. So you are profaning the Sabbath, I mean, you're working on Sabbath, but you're guiltless. I mean, you're not committing a sin, because your work that you're doing on the Sabbath is the work of God. It's spiritual work. So you're not supposed to do work that elevates yourself. You're not supposed to do work that gives you financial gain on the Sabbath. You're not supposed to do hard labor, hard work, and because that's supposed to be time for your rest. But you're also not supposed to do work that exalts yourself either. But now, if you're exalting God, if you're sharing the word and the wisdom of God, you have to work on the Sabbath. So Yeshua, of course, is exalting the Father. That's his whole mission, right? It's salvation. He is raising us up to God and joining us to God by, forgiving us of our sins and showing us how to go forth and sin no more by following the Torah, by following Yahuwah's instruction. Because he is the living word of God. He is the living Torah. And so he, on the Sabbath, he is doing the work of God. The work of his Father. He is doing the work of his Father. Therefore, he is allowed to work on the Sabbath. He went on from there and entered their synagogue. And a man so a synagogue is, it's the Hebrew word for church. So he went on from there and entered their synagogue and entered their church. And a man was there with a withered hand. And they asked him, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? So that they might accuse him. He said to them, which one of you who has a sheep, if it falls into a pit or a ditch on the Sabbath, will not take hold of it and lift it out? Of how much more value is a man than a sheep? So it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Then he said to the man, stretch out your hand. And the man stretched it out, and it was restored, healthy like the other. But the Pharisees went out and conspired against him, how to destroy him. And so that's another thing that the Torah, the law, God's instruction points out, that no, helping people, being a doctor or being a police officer or being a fireman, those people are allowed to work on the Sabbath because they are helping their fellow man. And in helping their fellow man, I mean, that's the majority of the Torah. That's the majority of the laws and the commandments is to help your fellow man, because the laws are summarized by love your God, love Yahuwah Elohim with all your heart and all your soul and all your mind and all your might, and to love your fellow man, your neighbor, as yourself. And so if you love God, you'll love your fellow man as well. So if that summarizes all 613 of the commandments, if you're helping heal someone or helping save someone's life or helping save someone's house, you are loving your fellow man. You're helping widows and orphans and those in need. You are fulfilling the commandments. On a Sabbath, whenever you're supposed to rest, are you supposed to rest from following God? Are you supposed to rest from following the commandments? No, you're still to follow God and to follow the commandments. In fact, resting on the Sabbath is following one of the commandments. So back then, and even to this day, some Jews, some people who claim to follow God, say, oh no, you can't, do any work whatsoever on the Sabbath, otherwise you are sinning. And what Yeshua is saying here is he's pointing out to them what the Torah actually says, what the first 5 books of Moses does say. And if you go back and read it, you'll see, yes, it says you are to help out your fellow man. And so doing work that helps out your fellow man is allowed on the Sabbath. And that's also one of the reasons that the priests are allowed to work on the Sabbath, is that they are helping their fellow man. So spiritual work is also helping their fellow man. In sharing the word of God with you, I'm not helping you. God is helping you. God, no help can come from me. But I am being a facilitator here so that you are building your relationship with Yeshua HaMashiach. You're building your walk with Jesus Christ, your daily walk. Getting to know him personally, getting to know, since he is the word of God, beginning to know the living Torah, the Torah, better by me sharing it with you so that, God can bless you. So our next reading is Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 9, verse 14 through 24. What shall we say then? Is there injustice in Elohim's part? So justice or righteousness is also in Hebrew, justice and righteousness is the same word. And that means to follow God's instruction, follow the Torah. So injustice or unrighteousness is to not follow God's instruction. So what shall we say then? Is there injustice? Is there not following God on Elohim's part, on God's part? So does God not lead us to righteousness? Does God lead us to injustice, to unrighteousness? Does God in his instruction tell us to not follow, and God in his laws, in his commandments, Does God tell us to not follow his laws and commandments? By no means, or in Greek, because Greek is the only manuscripts we have of the New Testament remain. In Greek, meganoto. Meganoto, by no means. And as I've said before, meganoto is actually very strong words in Greek. It's almost a curse word. It's saying hell no. So it's Paul here. Paul is saying, are we then to say that God is telling us to not follow his commandments? Hell no. Meganoto, by no means. For he says to Moshe, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. So then, it depends not on human or not on man, but it depends not on human will, not on the will of man, not on the wants of man or exertion, or not on the actions of man, but on Elohim, who has mercy. For the scriptures says to Pharaoh, or the Torah says to Pharaoh, because that was the only scripture that was around back then, was the Torah and the Tanakh, because the New Testament wasn't around yet when this letter was being written. So, for the Torah says to Pharaoh, for this very purpose I have raised you up, that I might show my power in you, and that my name might be proclaimed in all the earth. We just read that in the half Torah reading. So then he has mercy on whomever he wills, and he hardens whomever he wills. You will say to me then, why does he still find fault? And fault, of course, would be sin. For who can resist his will? But who are you, O man, who answer back to Elohim? Who are you to talk back to God? Will what is molded say to its molder, why have you made me like this? So God created us. Who are we to question God? Has the potter no right over the clay to make out of the same lump one vessel for honorable use and another for dishonorable use? So we got to remember that we're humans. We're men. We're mankind. And the Hebrew word for humans, for mankind, is Adama, or Adam. And Adama both means mankind, but also means red clay. And in fact, in the Septuagint, when it talks about Adam being formed of the dust of the earth, it says that Adam is formed of the slime of the earth, or of the clay of the earth. So you see how it's talking about God is the potter who forms the clay. It's talking directly about God and us and forming us. And it's God who forms us. And you might say, why is God bless one and not the other? And why is some people honorable and some people dishonorable? What saying? What if Elohim, desiring to show his wrath and to make known his power, and power also means action, has endured with much patience vessels of wrath prepared for destruction, in order to make known the riches of his glory for vessels of mercy, which he has prepared beforehand for glory, even us whom he has called, not from the Judeans only, but also from the nations. So that is to say, not just from the southern kingdom, but of Israel, but also the northern 10 lost tribes who are scattered out amongst the nations. And not only them, but also those of the Gentiles, those who choose to turn away from false teachings and false gods and choose to be grafted in and to become children of Israel. And our final reading is Paul's second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 6, verse 14 through chapter 7, verse 1. Do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers. For what partnership has righteousness with lawlessness? So that means you're to be set apart. You're not to be of this world. For what does following Torah, following God's teaching, God's instruction, have to do with following the opposite of God's teaching and instruction? Or what fellowship has light or wisdom or knowledge with darkness or ignorance? What fellowship does the wise have with the foolish? Wise, as we know from Proverbs, being those who follow the Torah, and ignorant or the foolish, those who do not. What accord has Hamashiach, or Christ, with Belial? That I'm going to assume is a false Canaanite god. Or what portion does a believer share with an unbeliever? What agreement has the temple of Elohim with idols? So, where do idols, where do false gods belong in the temple of Yahuwah Elohim? They don't. For we are the temple of the living Elohim, as Elohim said, I will make my dwelling among them and walk among them, and I will be their Elohim, and they shall be my people. Therefore go out from their midst and be separate from them, says Yahuwah, and touch no unclean thing. Then I will welcome you, and I will be a father to you, and you shall be sons and daughters to me, says Yahuwah El Shaddai, the Lord Almighty. Since we have these promises, beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from every defilement of body and spirit, bringing holiness to completion in the fear or honor or respect of Elohim. So that is to say that we are not to be of this world, that we are to be set apart, that we are to follow Elohim. It says that we are to be separate or holy or set apart. And what does the holy have with the unholy? What does the righteous have to do with the unrighteous, right? We're to be set apart. And it says, and touch no unclean thing. And then, and then it later says, let us cleanse ourselves from every defilement of body and spirit. Well, how do you know what is clean and unclean? How do you know what is the defilement and what is good? The Torah, God's instruction, His teaching. That's the only way you know. So many people who claim to be Christians, but they're not following the word. They're not following the word of God. They don't. They ask, "Is this a sin? Is that a sin?" They don't know. They're in the dark about it. What should I do? They're always asking God, "What should I do?" But it's right in front of them. As Yeshua said, "Have you not read the scriptures?" God tells us what is clean and unclean, what to do and what not to do. That is His Torah, His instruction, His teaching. So Paul is here saying, since we have these promises, promise of salvation, beloved, let us cleanse ourselves from every defilement of body and spirit. Don't take into your body anything that's unclean. And spirit, don't take into your life and into your mind, into your heart, anything that's unclean. Bringing holiness to completion in the honor of Elohim. How do you honor Yahuwah Elohim? By doing what He says. And that's how you be holy. That's how you have holiness. That's how you have set-apartness. So that is the final reading for today. So, in closing, are you, Yahuwah Elohim, King of the universe, who sanctifies us with your commandments, and who has given us your Torah, your instruction, your teaching, and who has given us your living Torah, your word, Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus Christ. May our eyes be open to taking in your word, and may we become closer to your teachings, your instructions, and therefore become closer in our daily relationship with Yahuwah, with Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus Christ, your Son, your living word, your path to salvation. May we have open eyes to see your instruction. May our hearts be open to taking in your instruction. May our necks be soft, our hearts circumcised, so that we may humble ourselves and die to our own will, the human will, the will of man, and live out your will, your teachings, your instruction, your path of salvation. May we proclaim your instruction, your path of salvation, your Yeshua. May we proclaim your Son, Jesus Christ, Yeshua HaMashiach, in our mouths and in our actions, in the works of our hands and in our deeds. May we exalt, rise up, and sanctify you, Yahuwah Elohim, and your Son, Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus Christ. Amen. And may the Lord bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May his countenance be turned towards you and grant you peace. For Yeshua HaMashiach, Prince of Peace. Amen.